location in Homestead and digs down somehow 6 feet into the solid rock there and finds a well. So he had well water there, and he actually put a little, bucket where you drop it with the rope and the crank handle. So he had fresh water from this well, and he also used it for a storage. He would get the old mason jars, and he'd put up string beans. And people always ask me, well, how did he eat? How did he live? Well, he lived out of his garden. Sometimes he'd trap a rabbit or something like that. But he mainly kind of ate vegetables, and he had a little refrigerator right there. And that's the steps. He actually has steps that go down into the well, George, and these are carved from one piece of stone.
Jeez. One piece?
One piece. As he goes down, it's this little spiral kind of staircase, and he actually had a huge stone, like a merry-go-round, that he would roll over the opening so children couldn't come down and fall into it.
Okay, so he's assembling, then, the blocks back in Homestead. Is anybody trying to see what's going on, or,
yes.
or where's the land? I mean, is it that private?
Well, it's private. If you were to go back in that time and look, you would see down here in Florida we have what we call scrub pines, and like a scrub area, which will mean there'll be a little bit of lowland grass, and then there'll be pines. Now, Ed selected this area also because the pines that he needed. A lot of people have asked me, well, did the tripods there, what kind of wood were they made of? Was any special wood, did that help him in any way? All the ponds or the poles that he would use would have been heart pine because they were readily available. And those telephone poles, some of them were 30 and 40 feet tall, okay? So he would have used that in that area. And people did try to sneak up on him at first. And after a while, what he would do is he had these little corners in the castle, and he would step up on the wall. People would be 100 yards out there, George, in the woods, using binoculars. He would know they were there. He would stand up on the wall, and he would say, how are you doing tonight? He said, look, you guys make me nervous. I can't work until you go back. He would
always polite, though, wasn't he?
Always polite. Never wanted to ruffle any feathers. Because you got to remember, here he is, he's from Latvia. He's, still a foreigner, and now his English was good, but he still had a slight accent, and people were very suspicious. So he never wanted to ruffle feathers. Plus, that was just his personality. He was not someone to confront people, or they said he never swore. They said he never saw him lose his temper, always cool and calm.
Okay, once this was going on and people were trying to sneak around and look at him, did anybody from any newspaper ever do a story on him while he was there, while he was alive?
Yes, there were several newspaper interviews. And in fact, one of them said, that he was, I think the headline said something like, castle builder lives to build the castle for his sweet 16. And they talked about him, being sick and waiting for Agnes and this type of thing. So there were several articles. And actually, Ed sort of got semi-famous in that area. They took pictures of him and showed him sitting at the castle. And actually, one of the newspaper articles said, the castle man doesn't need your help. Thank you very much. And the article explained how when people would come up, he would stop working, and they really went into detail about what he was doing at Coral Castle. So people from miles around started coming to see Ed in the castle.
Did any reporter speculate on how he did this?
I don't think so. At the time, it was an interesting place, but Ed was so private and so kind of reclusive out where he was that they were curious about it, George, but there were so many things going on in their lives. You had farmers and you had their lives, and they didn't pay as much attention to it as they would today.
Yeah, but what kind of reporters could they be, Joe, if he's building this incredible castle and they didn't say, hey, Ed, you're by yourself. How'd you move them?
Of course, they would ask him, and he would always just politely say, well, I know the secrets of the pyramids. I know the secrets of Stonehenge. George, he was an expert at deflecting your questions. Oh, yes, they asked him all the time, but they could never get a word out of him. And after a while, 2 or 3 interviews, they learned to just say, well, instead of asking him, they just say, yeah, I know, you know the secrets of the pyramids. He always gave them the same type answers. So after a while, it was like you were just beating your head against the wall. So when you went to interview him, you tried to ask him things that he might answer.
He died in 1951, I believe, right?
That's correct.
he's got to have told one person, one close friend, how he did it.
Nothing. All he would tell you, and he would say...
Did he have a close friend?
No. Well, yes, he did. There was a man named Orville Irwin, who was a close friend of his, who actually kind of documented some of the things that Ed did there in Coral Castle. But as far as a close friend, no. Ed just didn't want to. He didn't want to develop. I think the experience with Agnes. I think that he decided that he was going to work, and you got to remember the work he's doing. He doesn't really have time to socialize. Even after he builds Coral Castle, he spends his time doing radio experiments, magnet experiments. He's the kind of guy. We make a joke here about watching paint dry. Well, he actually put mold in one of his pools and watched the mold grow in the sunlight. So he just didn't have time for people.
That is, how old was he when he died, Joe?
He was 64.
64 years old. He built the thing when he was in his mid-20s. So for all those years, he stayed and lived at Coral Castle?
Stayed and lived at Coral Castle. And now, here's the cool thing. At night, a lot of times, you had to go up to the door there, and there was a bell, and you had to ring it twice. If you rang it 3 times, he said, you didn't follow my instructions, so I'm not giving you a tour. So you had to do everything exactly the way Ed wanted it. But people would go by there at night, and if he wasn't working, they'd ring the bell, and he'd come in, and sometimes they'd listen to music. He'd cook them hot dogs, and they said he would always, and this is why I'm so convinced, George, that Agnes existed, because he described her as radiant, well-bred, and a girl that he loved, and that this was a time in his life that he'll never forget. And they said he would look out towards Latvia, look out across the ocean there, and to the stars also, and he'd say, I'm telling you, one day my sweet 16 will come. And so enthusiastic. They said, he talked about her so much after a while, people began to wonder, did she really exist, or is she a figment of his imagination?
Well, who knows? Now, What did he die of, Joe?
He actually died of malnutrition. He actually, they called it...
Probably wasn't making any money, so he didn't eat. What was his income stream?
Well, believe it or not, now, there are rumors that he had a little bit of stock in a city company there. I haven't found much evidence to that. When he died, they actually, in a pipe there that he left behind, he put a string, and there was 38 $100, crisp $100 bills.
Did he physically ever work?
Well, not
as
really.
A job there?
Not really. But if you got to remember this now, you got to remember 20 years of collecting dimes. Okay, and later on, and there's a funny story. Down there, there's a place where if he was not in the castle right there, but you want to put your money in there and come back later, you could actually put it in a little thing he put in there, and it said, put your dimes here. And later on, when he moved the castle to Homestead, he went up to a quarter. So he left the old admission 10 cents in the old place because he didn't want people to know that he went up to a quarter. So you got to remember,
he couldn't have generated that kind of cash to survive.
Well, over 20 years, though, think about it. There was no taxes.
All right, hold on, Joe. We'll come back. We'll talk about this. This puzzles me. How the guy was there for 40 years and never went out and had a job. Ed Leedskalnin even had a health chair. We're going to talk about that, too, and much more on Coast to Coast AM. Joe's website, waitingforagnes.com, is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. How did he get the money, Joe, besides just his living expenses, to buy the land and the materials and things like that?
Well, now, remember, the land that he actually bought, George, I think the original site was like 10 acres there, and I think he paid $12 for it. The site now only has, I think, an acre or two because, of course, over the years it was auctioned off, and, the castle only encompasses a smaller area there. So, like I said, pardon me, $12. Yeah, and remember, George, in these days, or in those days, I should say, a dime went a long way. I mean, you could buy bread, you could go to the movie theater, you could have popcorn, the dime just went a long way, and even later on when he was doing it, a quarter was a long way. And as I said, and I can't find any information on this, but they said that they believed that he had some stock in some city utilities there somehow. That information is vague, and that he had a little monthly income from that. But as